Well, a few days ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Georgia, Republican, created a bit of a tempest in the Twitter teapot by warning of Nancy Pelosi and her Gazpacho police. Ha ha! I'm not about to make fun of Marjorie Taylor Greene, first of all, because of Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment. No, I come not to bury Marjorie, but to praise her, because whether it happened either as a slip of the tongue, or maybe she doesn't know the difference between gazpacho and Gestapo, doesn't matter, because one way or another, she's right. She's absolutely right. We don't need to worry about the Gestapo police. We need to worry about the Gazpacho police. Let me tell you what I mean. This is tomato soup, and this is Gazpacho. They're more or less the same. Gazpacho is a more delicate flavor, much more nuanced, served cold. It's the kind of thing you might order at the French Laundry if you were the governor of California or something like that. Tomato soup, on the other hand, is something you might heat up if you're a truck driver in Canada. So, just so we're clear, this is tomato soup, and this is gazpacho. And this is tomato soup, and this is gazpacho. And these guys drink tomato soup, and this guy drinks gazpacho. I'm not going to dishonor the millions of people who were killed not only by the Gestapo, but also by their much more prolific counterparts in the Soviet Union, alternately known as the Cheka or the NKVD or the KGB. They renamed themselves 8 or 9 times. But it might be useful to look ahead, to kind of keep a weather eye on the future and see where the Gazpacho police and the Gestapo police seem to have a few things in common. So why don't we take a look at a book called Koba the Dread by Martin Amis. If you want a book on Stalin or the communists, this is a great one to start. It's not very long. It's very snappy in its writing, very personal. I love it. I was looking at it the other day. And I was struck as I read Martin Amis's Koba the Dread. By the way, Koba was Stalin's first nickname before he kind of settled into Stalin. So let's have a look at some of these quotes that I found, because some of them do have, if not the portent of the future, then certainly a weird sort of familiarity to it. So why don't we start with this quote? When he was talking about the Bolsheviks and how the Bolsheviks came to power and how they governed, here's what Martin Amis said. He said, quote, "This left was the new left. It represented, or turned out to represent, revolution as play. The Redeemer class was no longer to be found in mines and factories. It was to be found in university libraries and lecture halls." That's how the Bolsheviks took over Russia and caused one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. And I think it's probably fair to say that those people who work in mines and factories are people who eat tomato soup, and those found in university libraries and lecture halls are more of the Gazpacho crowd. Martin Amis tells the story of young Nikita Khrushchev, who's still a puppy, sort of an up-and-comer on his way to running the entire murder show. But at this point, when he made this quote, he was really still pretty much a young man. And this is what Khrushchev said, quote, "A Bolshevik is someone who feels himself to be a Bolshevik even while sleeping." Now to that, Amis replied, "But that's what they want, the believers, the steely ones. That's what they live for, the politicization of sleep. They want politics to be going on everywhere all the time, politics permanent and circumambient. They want the ubiquitization of politics. They want the politicization of sleep." Let me know if any of that sounds familiar. You know, one of the reasons that the country's so divided was because prior to the arrival of this anti-American progressive movement in the mid-60s, probably somewhere in there, the difference between a Republican and a Democrat essentially came down to, I'm in favor of a 13% tariff, and the Republican might say, I'm in favor of a 9% tariff. And that's all the politics you got in your life. Sports weren't politicized, movies weren't politicized, conversations weren't politicized, social media wasn't politicized because there was no social media. You would talk to people and strangers and not assume that they were of a certain political party because it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. For quite a long time in the United States, Washington was a minor town. It was really one of the least important places in this country because we had better things to do. We had finance running out of New York. We had all of this mercantile stuff like livestock and grain coming out of Chicago. We had movies and all this stuff coming out of Hollywood and so on. But now, Politics is everywhere. That's the strategy of the left, to put politics into your sleep. Make sure that everything is politicized. And now we're at war with each other over things like restrooms and track meets and all the rest of this stuff. This is how they function. This is what they do. And as I said, it's kind of a good idea to keep an eye forward, which is really backward, to see what the actual Gestapo-type police did, and then compare it to what the Gazpacho police are trying to do today. Now, again, from Martin Amis and Koba the Dread, here's a quote about the disastrous economic policies put in place after the Gazpacho socialists gained power. Regards inflation, quote, between January 1st, 1917 and January 1st, 1923, the price of goods increased by a factor of 100 million. That's what runaway inflation looks like. Now, in a footnote, Amos adds, by 1921, 100,000 rubles was worth 2 pre-war kopecks. That'd be pre-revolution kopecks. The net result of war communism was the obliteration of the industrial base and the worst famine in European history. Okay, we're not at 100 million times yet. We're at 50%. But the problem with runaway inflation is it happens very, very slowly and then all of a sudden very, very quickly. By the way, he also coined a term that at least I hadn't heard before when talking about the perennial victimhood of the Bolshevik state. All of our failures are due to wreckers. All of our failures are due to foreigners or spies or agents or whatever. This is another quote. Martin Amis said, the word for this is agonism, the permanent struggle of the self-appointed martyr. Now that one rings a real contemporary bell. And by the way, if you're wondering why modern progressives have no sense of humor, no sense of forgiveness, and end up eating themselves when one of them goes slightly off of the party line, then the rest of them attack them. You can just ask J.K. Rowling about that and any other large number of people who have been committed leftists their whole life and then said something as if they were in a free country, which got them the wrath of the mob. You ever wonder why there's such a strong emotional response from the left to attack leftists when they go off of the party line? Well, this is what Martin Amis said. Quote, by 1939, it's fair to say that all people were enemies of the people, unquote. Why? Well, because in Martin Amis's own words, quote, the militant utopian, the perfectibilizer, from the outset is in a malevolent rage at the obvious fact of human imperfectibility. Think about that. Just think about that. Tell me if that doesn't have the ring of truth to you right now when you think about the anger and this perennial low-grade rage that's just the sort of the default state of the social justice warrior. What is it that drives that? Well, that are people who are determined to enforce perfection on people and society, and they are completely and fully aware of the obvious fact of human imperfectibility. That's got to be a rough life, actually. Now, as a young man, Martin's father, Kingsley Amis, who was actually much more famous, was an avowed communist when he was a young man. He eventually came to see what the sham was all about, though, and this is what Kingsley Amis had to say about the entire draw of socialism, at least as far as it dealt with him. Quote, we're dealing with a conflict of feeling and intelligence, a form of willful self-deception, whereby a part of the mind knows full well that its overall belief is false or wicked, but the emotional need to believe is so strong that that knowledge remains, as it were, insisted, isolated, powerless to influence word or deed. Now, that's a banger of a word right there, by the way, insisted, E-N-C-Y-S-T-E-D, not insisted as in I insisted upon. Encysted meaning enclosed in a cyst. When the body has something foreign material inside it, wraps it up in fat and some other materials and creates a cyst. It basically protects itself from it. How many people do you know on the left who have heard something on CNN, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, CBS, all of it, and then they're confronted with different information, and you're willing to prevent facts, and their knee-jerk reaction is, oh, well, that's just Fox. That's Fox News. That's Fox News. I don't have to listen to that because I know that's wrong. That's just right-wing propaganda. This has been fact-checked. This has been debunked. That is insisting the information. It's basically taking the evidence and the proof that they might be wrong about something and wrapping it up in a nice, sturdy, impenetrable little ball that they can ignore for the rest of their lives. Now, tomato soupers like me and you are often derided by the Gazpacho police as demented conspiracy theorists with regards to things like, election integrity, the vaccine, FBI, and their involvement with the deep state, and so on. But this is what Martin Amis had to say about the Soviet Union, and this is a really interesting quote. He said, quote, "A true description of the Soviet Union exactly resembled a demented slander of the Soviet Union." That's what things look like to me. I can't tell anymore the difference between what sounds like demented slander and actual fact, because every single day, more of the stuff that used to seem like demented slander is now a true description of what's actually going on in this country. Now, Martin Amis was writing his book in the early 21st century, in the safety of England, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who spent years in the Gulag, was the actual conscience of that monstrous state. And he was wondering, as he was in the Gulag, of just exactly how did all of this nightmare come about? The fraudulent show trials, the elimination, or you could say cancellation of entire families or individuals, the midnight firing squads that went on for half a century, and the gulags themselves. On page 13 of volume 1 of his absolute classic, The Gulag Archipelago. Now remember, this is not the big reveal at the end of the book, but this is right at the very beginning. Solzhenitsyn states that what caused that unparalleled human disaster was, quote, "We didn't love freedom enough. We purely and simply deserved everything that came after," unquote. Look, the horrors of the Gestapo, the horrors of a secret police system like the Cheka, which became the NKVD, which became the KGB, the state murderers, those horrors were inflicted upon the Russian people by actual murderers with guns, and those murderers went at work on an unarmed population. So what's our excuse? Because we're not facing Gestapo policemen. We're facing Gazpacho policemen, powerless, cowardly individuals who are constantly turning our own goodness against us. There are no guns to our head to make us comply with these rules. There are no physical threats that they can issue that have any meaning. Every time we fight back, every time we stand up, just look at the truckers in Alberta, every single time we decide to do the one thing that we should have been doing the whole time, and that is calling their bluff. Every time, from little tiny school board meetings all the way up to the Parliament of the great state of Canada, every single time, they run away. So in the end, it looks like Majorie Taylor Greene got it right, whether on purpose or accidentally, because in our society today, in 2022 America, we're not terrorized by the Gestapo police, but we are terrorized by the Gazpacho, and we're arrested by the Gazpacho, and we're detained by the Gazpacho, and we're herded up by the Gazpacho, and we're imprisoned by the Gazpacho, and we are systematically denied all of our rights because of the power of the Gazpacho. You've got an excuse if it's the Gestapo police coming after you. What's your excuse when it's these Gazpacho policemen coming after you?